And another week has gone by. It's showtime once more.
Hey, there you are, Mac. I'm looking forward to this week.
Yeah. I've had a very busy week this week. Been traveling. I've been on planes. Actually a couple of weeks ago, I hadn't gotten on a plane for 19 months, and now I seem to be on one every week. How about that?
Well, Mick, I'm happy for you. I love it when you go
and then you tell me you've been at the beach. I don't know. I got to. I know.
There's a problem with that.
I had my break. But to matters of great import. Wow, what are we talking about this week? We are talking about big jobs, big job management, because big jobs, when you get them, everybody's excited. It's a big blessing. It makes a huge difference. The salesman's already bought his second home in the Bahamas. The owners are thinking, wow, we're going to get a lot of distributions out of this one. And of course, sometimes that happens. It goes really, really well. But other times it can go really, really badly. So the topic of today is, and this might span a couple of shows, is, how do we ensure that we do our best on those big jobs to optimize them, deliver them, not only financially, but operationally with integrity, so that customer will come back to us, for the next one, because he knows we're capable of doing that. So that's the show. I know it's a favorite topic of yours, Andre.
Yeah, I mean, Mick, this is something that, obviously between the two of us, we've been studying this for many years now. And, it's, you and I spoke about this the other day in terms of, there seems or appears to be some degree of, a dysfunction in the sense that, and it's not that happens in one organization, this happens in many where one big job really goes beautifully, and you can just see the impact on the numbers. You can see the impact on people's level of let's call it just pure happiness, and satisfaction around their job. And then the same organization, sometimes even with the same people, we see a big job go completely south. And there always seems to be this inconsistency between, where a big job goes well and a big job doesn't go well.
And so, flooring by the numbers. Our mission is to help flooring companies get better. And a big element to us is whenever we work with clients, that big job area is always makes a material difference. If you can get a better level of consistency, you're always going to get some variability, but you don't want, big highs and then complete failures. You want some mitigation and some successes. And overall, you're performing at a reasonably high level. But big is a relative term. So, we wanted to start with a little bit of a definition of, how would we define a big job? And I think the best articulation we had of that, Andre, when you and I were talking, is a big job is anything that is bigger than 50% of your net profit. So if your net profit was $1 million, anything above 500,000 would be considered a big job. If your net profit is 5 million, then why did I pick a number? I can't divide by 2.
No. What we did say is that
I can't do math. I can't do math on camera. I'm thinking, oh no, I've gone down a cul-de-sac here. I'm in trouble. We got to do a Yui.
Nice, but a big job. If your profit is $5 million, then by definition, a big job would be something north of $2.5 million. But no, what we are saying is the minute your profit is greater than $2 million, a big job will always be something $1 million or more. That will be considered to be a big job.
And why do we say that, Andre?
Well, just because of the significance, normally at that size, it always has an impact for the sort of the traditional size businesses that we have in the commercial flooring industry, right? Okay, so we don't have $5 billion businesses, and we know that normally a big job really of $1 million, anybody would say that's a significant job, right? And
Yeah.
so we try and sort of look at that $1 million mark as being okay. The minute it's $1 million and more, it would be classified as a big job, right?
Or if you're a smaller company, our initial definition, anything that's 50% of your net profit.
Right.
If it goes badly, it's gonna make a big difference to your performance, right?
Right, and Mick, the thing with the just in terms of big jobs, we also notice with the majority of our clients and others, they have a big job is pretty much always in existence. It's there. It's not that you know what I mean. So it's very few times do we see that big jobs are completely absent, right? So this is something that applies pretty much to the majority of the commercial flooring industry, and our goal here is to say, okay, guys, something is broken, and I promise you, I put $1 on this, that there are very few senior managers or owners that can say, hey, we had big jobs with absolutely every one of them have been perfect. Now we've had many times where smaller jobs go north and blah blah blah, all of that sort of stuff, but the impact is still absorbable. When a big job goes north, right, or south, whichever direction you believe in, I don't know, whichever way you like to look at it, but when it doesn't go as well as it should, there is significant consequence, right? And not only just from a financial perspective, of course, the financial perspective really hurts, but from a perspective of confidence for the next job, etc., the way that we interface with our customer, all of those sort of things, So it's an area that we really need to do better, and it is an area where there is some, we believe, hey Mick, some very good low-hanging fruit.
Right. So where do we think where have we seen the inconsistency come from? What's some of the causation here?
Mick, and I know you're one of those guys. You always like it to be very specific. Like I said to you, that. But here's the thing. I think I believe it really is a combination of two things. It's a combination of resources and capability. And sometimes resources is the key driver, and sometimes capability is the key driver. But at the end of the day, the only difference between a small job and a big job, really, well, not the only difference, but the substantial difference is a big job consumes enormous amount of resources. I mean, you look at just the whole way that RFIs get managed and handled. And the only thing that I have, the only metric I have this is the first thing I look at is when a big job goes south, I look at the way that RFIs were managed. That is the first thing I look at. And you go and inevitably, all right, unless the job, okay, with one caveat, if the job's gone south because we mispriced the job or we didn't take the job, I'm taking that out of the thing. But our solution will address that as well, because that's also a failure, okay? And that's a core capability failure. If we price the job badly, it's a core capability failure. If we, if we took the job off, if the quantities were wrong, that's a capability failure, or at least it's a process failure as such. So from our perspective, what we're looking at is traditionally one of the key reasons that a big job goes bad is because it does consume enormous resources. And when those resources aren't available at the time when it's required, that usually indicates a failure point. right there and then. And normally when we have one of those, we have more of them and more of them, and then you get the snowball effect. So my my way of answering your question, I believe, is both resources and capability.
Okay, very good. And when resources are strained, typically where do you see the pinch points?
Well, you see, here's the interesting thing. Normally, people would say that the constraint on the resources is always while the jobs, after the job started. And many times that's look, let's agree, that is one of the areas where there is a fairly significant requirement for things to go well, let's call it. But often the resources can be constrained at any point in time, from the time that we decide what job should we take versus what job we shouldn't take. And we'll talk a little bit about sort of why we believe this failure happens, but resources and capability for large work needs to have, we need to change. We need to change the way we do it. And I'm saying it's a fairly radical change. And it is a mindset change, because the mindset of the way we run small jobs versus the mindset of how we run big jobs has to be significantly different. Just purely for one reason only, Mick, it's just risk. The risk in our organization, and not only risk, but how do we really make the customer successful? Those are the two fundamental reasons.
Right. And when does the risk mitigation conversation start? How do we address that?
Oh man, I love that. You see, so you think about it, and Mick, and I mean, okay, you've set me up here beautifully. Thank you, thank you for that. But and really, this is something that I mean, you have really created I think, a little movement around here. And when you talk about your in our sales environment, the way we say yes or no to work, often the risk is when we ultimately say we want to pursue a job. And you think about it, who makes that decision? In most cases, right?
Right. It's generally the salesperson and their enthusiasm for a particular sector, GC area, belief system. They're calling the shots, right?
Right. And Mick, sometimes you can get a very, very successful salesperson, right? That's done, numerous, the $30,000, the $40,000, the $50,000 jobs, done them beautifully and successfully, and etc. And then, their customer, the GC, says, "Hey, I got a whale for you." Right. And what do you think the salesperson's motivation is?
they want the big deal. I mean, we haven't found a salesperson that doesn't really want to chase the big deal. And often, we hear the complaint that we wished our salespeople would still go after those smaller jobs because they're easier to manage, they're easier to resource load. But when we just keep getting whale after whale, it's very lumpy, very, very unpredictable. Salesperson's happy, but the requirement to be able to schedule and manage the resources is it's almost impossible.
Right. So the salesperson motivated by what? Their back pocket, aren't they? Right. Well, I mean, inevitably. Okay.
And we love salespeople for that. That's why we have salespeople.
But we want that. I mean,
we want that. Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. That's great. But at the same time, we have an organization that also needs to look after, their back pocket, right? And their customer, and what their customer wants and what their customer doesn't want. So, the motivation, often there is a misalignment right up front that creates a risk, Mick, because the motivation of the salesperson and the motivation of the organization is not completely in alignment. So the salesperson pursues the job, and there's so many good reasons. Their ego. I mean, when you talk about, when people have a sales meeting and they talk about it, a sales guy presents, well, I'm busy chasing this, $1.5 million job or this $3.5 million job. And I mean, jobs that we're seeing today, what, 5, 6, 7, $8 million jobs? And everybody, nobody wants to talk about the $50,000 jobs that they're doing. Forget about it. Whoa. Hey, look, look at me. I can identify and chase an $8 million job with, these whatever they want to say, these very, very large contracts.
So Andre, in our 4P methodology, when we're looking at organizations, we've talked about this before. We look at a number of dimensions, portfolio, people, process, and performance. On the portfolio side, this is how we fill our portfolio. How do we select the type of work into our portfolio, and having good conversations about this is the type of work, this is the balance of work in our portfolio. If you've got too much of these big, large jobs, it's impossible for you to flex your business to be able to accommodate those. So there needs to be a balance in the portfolio. So absolutely, Andre, just allowing. I mean, salespeople will go and hunt, and they'll go and hunt big game if they're allowed to and they're capable, and many are. And if you don't direct the traffic, you're going to find out that you've got a bunch of whales, hitting your pipeline at the same time, which presents the problem that Andre's already talked about, is, being able to resource this level of complexity and risk.
Right. So if we think about it now, we're getting to the solution, hey? And I think, Mick, we have some fairly strong conviction around the solution. Okay, so there is a better way. We convinced. Not only are we convinced, we've seen the better way work better. Right now, it may not always work exactly better for the salesperson individually, but as a business as a whole, it definitely works better, and ultimately to the advantage of the salesperson. And here, let me explain. Many of our, let's call it commission systems, our compensation systems, what are they driven by? They're driven by the amount of gross profit you deliver. Some people even have ceilings on their gross profit. And they say, well, you've got to have per job, not even on average, but per job, you've got to deliver more than, let's call it 20%, 22%, depending on the organization, right? So, of course, for a salesperson, if they have a big job against their name, they want to make sure that at least, this job comes in where they're going to be commissionable, let's call it, all right? Mm-hmm. So our solution is very, very heavily driven to the benefit of all, in our opinion. And we'd love to get some, feedback from others, but in our opinion. And so what we're saying is that the traditional approach is not the best way to drive basically two things: consistency, and number two, the ability to actually create a capability of doing large work, whatever size your organization is. Doesn't matter what it is. But if you're going to do large work, you've got to have a capability to do so in a consistent way. So capability and consistency, let's call it fairly similar. Yep. So Mick, talking about this, let's see. So not only have we identified that the salesperson, or sometimes called project manager, whatever one, who is accountable for identifying the work, who's accountable for giving all of this work to, estimation or pre-construction, who's accountable for pricing it, right? And who's accountable for ensuring that it's been scheduled properly, and who's accountable for often the procurement, all right? So there's one individual, but there's also the same individual at the same time. What else are they accountable for?
Well, they've got all of their other accounts and then their pipeline to be able to attend to, right? All of their open bids, all of their bidding, You know, that thing that salespeople do, selling. They're too busy to do the selling because they're managing the big whales.
Right. Or they end up being too busy. They end up not being busy. They end up saying, oh, okay, I've sold the whale. I'm moving on to the next one. And my attention on the whale suddenly, you know, the shiny object has now become not so shiny anymore. Isn't that one of your sort of
It
things,
is.
the shiny
It
object,
is.
right? And so that conflict of you know, attention, and Mick, on these things, you got to have the right attention. You know, you got to be plugged in. It's, you know, that's one thing we've noticed. If you're plugged in on these big jobs and you truly know what's going on, you will have a successful big job, right? If you're not plugged in, believe me, no matter how good you are, you're going to be exposed to potential failure. Let's call it.
Right.
So this poor sales guy, right, who's now got the accountability to sell more other work, to manage the other work that they've sold, to get, you know, make sure that all of that. And normally, what do we have? We have salespeople who don't know how to manage, you know, even their cup of coffee in the morning. I mean, it's the truth. And I love salespeople, and I know they love me, but you know, and we love developing our salespeople. But they're not the greatest time managers. They're not the greatest managers, period. And yet we still do the same thing time in, time out. And then we hope the next time it's going to be better.
So I think a couple of points that have come out there. Number one, we have said that we generally see salespeople determine as a business where we're going to go and hunt, and they select the targets, and it would be probably, you know, behooving on the organization to actually have a little bit more control over that. And then secondly, when the salesman wrestles one of these beasts in, you know, we typically let them act in the same capacity that they would with a small sale, but the project management, the resource management, the risk management, the financial acumen that's required for that job exceeds the capability set of the salesperson. So an obvious answer, I think, Andre, which I know you were getting to, is we've got to have a multidisciplinary team working together on these big jobs. Isn't that right?
Right. So, I mean, right. And you know, I mean, yes. So the just one other point before we get into the solution. You're right. Absolutely right. But here's the next thing that happens, Mick. When we all start getting to hear about the salesperson's big job, right? And the salesperson gives the feedback, this is ours. Have you ever heard that?
For sure. Yeah, we're definitely going to get this one.
Oh, this is ours. Right.
It's gold.
Has there ever been situations that you know of, Mick, because I'll set you up for a change, where there's this is ours and we didn't get the job?
It would be comical if it wasn't so sad, is that if the day before the job has been awarded, right, and it gets awarded to your competitor, right, the day before, the level of conviction and excitement of we're going to win this is ours, we've got all the right relationships, we've done all the right things, you know, we've beaten everybody, you know, we're good. And then the following day, when they find out that they don't get it, there's all kinds of things that then creep out of the woodwork. Well, we weren't really involved at this stage, and we didn't really spec that, and really that part wasn't out to win. We really shouldn't have bid that part. The reality, the distortion between the two either sides of the bid is quite astonishing. So what it tells me is that the picture is never clear. right? So we're always making judgments. There's never a clear-cut conviction, this is absolutely ours to win. So we have to have some discipline to be able to read the tea leaves, if you will, and to be able to course correct as appropriate, right?
Right, Mick. So just to build a little bit on where you were talking about. So sometimes it's if the job goes, if we get the job and it goes south, the salesman is the bad guy, and if we don't get the job, the salesman's the bad guy. So and on the occasions that we got the job and it went well, okay, fantastic. But if you think about it, all of this, the information, the knowledge is driven around this one individual that may or may not be completely in alignment with the requirement. So and that's it. If we ask the salesperson, is during the job, is it all good? Yeah, it's all good. We ask the salesman before the job, are we going to get the job? Yeah, we're going to get the job. And that's it. That's the management system. And I'm saying that on those very specific foundation, it's a failure. So Mick, now let's talk about, well, what can we do differently? What is there a better way? Is there a better way for us to identify the work, for us to be involved in, bidding work that we want? And is there a better way to help our salesperson be more successful? And is there a better way to ensure that that job comes in the way it should, both from the customer's perspective and from our financial perspective?
Well, there are a number of dimensions in which we can improve that situation. I would, for the purposes of brevity and this call, let's, because there's a whole thing on who do we target, where do we win, what's our core capability, what kind of target should we? Let's assume that we've got an opportunity coming in it's in our sphere, right? It's within our capability. We've won in that area before. In terms of bringing that into the business, it's not adequate to allow the normal gestation of a sale and the sales management and the pipeline management and the review system for a project that has that much potential to be beneficial or risky to the organization. So we have to go and help the salesperson. We have to build a team around the salesperson or a business team to be able to look at those deals and position ourselves well. So that, I would say, the first thing is if there's a big job coming and we've defined what it is, then that immediately triggers a multifunction, multi-level review all the way up to the owner of the business, because it's so critical. And with that, collective genius, collective enterprise, we're going to be able to position ourselves and know we're doing the right things.
Right. So Mick, I mean, absolutely. So our strong recommendation is that there is the formation of a big job team. And it's not a committee, right? So we didn't use the word committee. Big difference. It's a big job team that takes the accountability for big jobs, not from inception to conclusion. That accountability is no longer the salesperson's accountability. That is the accountability of the big job. And there is a leader of the big job team. So one of the things we believe when it comes to team management, there is always a leader. Because otherwise, what happens? You get into this groupthink mode, right? Okay, and everybody just nods their head yes. Okay, so there is a leader. And not only, like you said, not only is there a team, the team has to have multiple disciplines. There's got to be absolute full engaged representation from, let's call it pre-construction or estimation, whichever word we use for that function. There's got to be absolute representation from operational side. There's got to be procurement representation, right? And there has to be obviously the salesperson. So the salesperson fits into the team when they have that opportunity. Otherwise, it's a different salesperson. But other than the salesperson, that team stays 100% intact. It's always there. So the minute that team has a process, when big jobs are identified, it will go through the big job filtering system. And if it's accepted by the big job filtering system, it goes to the next stage. So, and we'll talk more about that implementation, and there are some very specific nuances that we want to bring into that. But the first thing we want to, hopefully from this show, that we want people to think about, hey, Mick, is number one, is if you subscribe to our ideology, what would your big job management team look like? So that's your first requirement. What would it look like? Okay. And then, you know, in our next show, we'll talk a little bit about the accountability, the functionality of that big job, and how the big job system helps win, helps execute, and when they bring the salesperson into play and when they don't. So
good. I think Andre,
that's pretty much where we'd like to be.
Yeah. You've hit on it. So you were up against our 30 minutes. We're trying to make our shows a little punchier and give you something that's practical. And you know what we've said here, two very practical things. Number one, go through your your open bids and identify those big jobs. I mean, there's only going to be one or two or three or four that fit that criteria that would meaningfully, change the destiny of your business, either in a good way or a bad way, depending on whether they went well or they went badly. Then secondly, what we're saying is, these bids, in order to win them, in order to execute them well, it's got to have a multifunctional big job team. Think about what that team structure would look like, and also ask yourself the question: who would you like to be the leader of that team? Is it the salesperson? Is it right?
Yeah, great point.
Is it a different person each time? It doesn't have to be the salesperson. I mean, it's not going to be by default the owner every time, because that's hierarchical, and then everything the owner says, it's very difficult for the team to challenge. Right? So think about how you would get the best out of that diversity, because teams by default, to be successful, have to have a diverse complement. So even the most junior person, if they have some functional excellence to bring to that debate, you want to have that dialogue. You want them to feel as though that they've got a say. So think about who you'd have on your team, and then think about what that leadership role might look like, and send us your thoughts, and then next week we'll get into some implementation tactics.
Right, and guys, don't forget our end user course. Okay, please. We're not going to give up on this. So we've already had some really good feedback around this, Mick. So please don't forget our end user course. Get hold of Mick. Tell him, Mick, I want one of those, and you will feel so much better after that.
All right. Well, thanks for watching the show again this week. We'll be here every week, Wednesday, 11 East Coast time. See you next time.
Cheers, guys.